The late summer night in Westwood was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like the city was holding its breath. On the wide, tree-lined boulevard, the streetlights cast pools of orange onto the empty asphalt. It was a neighborhood of big houses set back from the road, where the only sounds after midnight were the hum of air conditioners and the distant sigh of a freeway. Officer Don Kellerman leaned against the side of his cruiser, the blue and red lights painting lazy circles on the pavement around him. He was a big man with a tired face that looked older than his 40 years. His uniform was always a little too tight across the shoulders. Next to him, his partner for the night, Officer Luis Ruiz, stood straighter, his eyes nervously scanning each car they waved through the checkpoint. Ruiz was new, still shiny with that academy polish, eager to do everything by the book. "See anything, Rook?" Kellerman asked, his voice a dry rasp. He took a sip from a paper coffee cup, grimaced, and tossed the rest into the gutter. "Just people going home, sir," Ruiz said. "Couple from that fundraiser, one guy from the golf club. All clear so far." "All clear," Kellerman echoed, a humorless smile on his lips. "Of course they're clear. This is Westwood. They have lawyers on speed dial and drink $100 scotch. They know the drill." He pushed himself off the car. "But you gotta look past the zip code, Ruiz. Bad decisions aren't picky about addresses. You look for the car that doesn't belong. The face that's a little too calm. The story that doesn't add up." Ruiz nodded, though he wasn't sure he understood. He'd been on the job for 3 months, and every shift with Kellerman felt like a lesson in a different kind of policing. It was less about the law sometimes, and more about a gut feeling Kellerman called the vibe. The checkpoint was a simple setup, cones funneling 2 lanes into one, a few signs blinking DUI stop ahead, and the 2 cruisers. They'd been here for 2 hours and had processed maybe 24 cars. A quick license and registration check, a sniff for alcohol, a wave on. It was boring, monotonous work, and boredom was a dangerous thing for a man like Kellerman. It made him itchy, eager for something to break the routine. That's when the sedan came into view. It was an old Toyota, maybe 10 years old, paint dull under the streetlights. It moved at a careful, exact speed right at the limit. In a neighborhood of luxury SUVs and sleek electric cars, it stood out like a worn shoe at a black tie party. "See?" Kellerman said, his posture stiffening. "There's your outlier. Let's have a chat." Ruiz stepped forward, waving his flashlight in the standard pattern. The Toyota slowed and pulled over smoothly, stopping exactly where Ruiz indicated. The engine cut off. Kellerman approached the driver's side, his boots making soft, deliberate clicks on the pavement. Ruiz went to the passenger side, his flashlight beam sweeping over the empty seats, then back to the driver. She was a young black woman, maybe in her early 20s. She wore a dark gray hoodie, her hands resting calmly on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The interior light showed a face that was watchful and still. There was no music playing, no phone in her hand. "Evening," Kellerman said, his voice all business. "License and registration, please?" "Good evening, officer," she replied. Her voice was level, polite but not warm. She moved slowly, deliberately, first taking her license from her wallet, then leaning over to pop the glove compartment for the registration. She handed both to Kellerman. His flashlight beam hit the license. Elena Vance, 22 years old. The address was in Crestview, a solid, middle-class neighborhood about 20 minutes away. He glanced from the photo to her face. She met his eyes directly. That directness, in Kellerman's experience, was often a challenge. Nervous people looked away. Guilty people overcompensated. Calm, direct eye contact? That was someone who thought they had control. "Everything all right, Miss Vance?" he asked, handing the documents to Ruiz to run a check. Out late in Westwood. I'm headed home from the library, she said simply. The university library. It closes at midnight. A student, Kellerman said, not really asking. He leaned down, resting his arms on her doorframe. He took a subtle sniff. No alcohol. The car smelled of old paper and clean cloth. What are you studying? Political science, she said. Ambitious. His radio crackled softly on his shoulder. Ruiz came back from the cruiser. All clear, officer, Ruiz reported. License is valid, registration current, no warrants. Kellerman nodded, but didn't move. The stop was over. He had no reason to keep her. But the car, her demeanor, the way she just sat there so composed it, grated on him. She should be relieved, hurrying to get going. Instead, she was waiting, patient as stone. Step out of the car for me, please, ma'am, Kellerman said. There was the slightest pause. A flicker in her composed expression. May I ask why, officer? Just a routine check. For everyone's safety. Step out, please. His tone left no room for discussion. Elena Vance took a quiet breath, then unclipped her seatbelt. She opened the door and stepped out onto the pavement. She was taller than he expected, almost his height. She kept her hands visible at her sides. Ruiz watched from the front of the car, his guts starting to tighten. This felt wrong. Kellerman walked a slow circle around her. You in a hurry to get somewhere? No, sir. I was on my way home. You seem a little tense. I'm just tired. It's been a long night of studying. He stopped in front of her. You have any weapons on you? Anything I should know about? No, officer. I do not. He was looking for a reason. Any reason. The boring night, the quiet street, this young woman who wasn't acting the way he thought she should. It all mixed into a slow-burning irritation. He needed to reassert the script, the one where he asked, and people jumped. I'm going to perform a pat-down for my safety. Arms out to the sides, please. On what grounds? She asked. Her voice was firmer now. You've confirmed my information is valid. You haven't stated any suspicion of a crime. Kellerman's jaw tightened. There it was. The challenge. I don't like your attitude, for one. And I observed a suspicious bulge near your waistline when you were seated. Now you can comply, or this can get a lot more complicated. Your choice. It was a lie. A stupid, transparent lie. Ruiz knew it. Kellerman knew it. But it was a tool, a way to get past the resistance. Elena's eyes hardened, but after a moment of holding his gaze, she slowly raised her arms out to her sides. The posture of surrender. A car drove by slowly from the other direction, the passengers staring. Kellerman moved in. He patted her down professionally, starting at her ankles, moving up her legs, over her hips. Her hoodie was loose, but he felt nothing beneath it but the shape of her body. No bulge, no weapon, no contraband, nothing. A flush of heat crept up his neck. He was in it now, and he had come up empty. The silence from Ruiz was deafening. He finished the pat-down and stepped back. The expected relief on her face wasn't there. Instead, there was a cold, assessing look. It unnerved him more than anger would have. Are we done here, officer? She asked, her voice like ice. The words were a trigger. Done? He wasn't done. He couldn't be. To be dismissed by this girl in this beat-up car on his own stop? A reckless idea, born of embarrassment and rising anger, took hold. Not quite, he said, his voice low. Lift your shirt and turn out your waistband. She stared at him, disbelief finally breaking through her calm. What? Absolutely not. That is a violation. You have no cause. It's a simple check. If you have nothing to hide, it's a simple procedure. "This is illegal," she stated, her voice rising for the first time. A few porch lights had come on in the houses nearby. Shadows moved behind curtains. Kellerman felt the eyes on him now. He was the show. He had to finish it. Without another word, he took his long, heavy flashlight from his belt. In one quick, brutal motion, he didn't touch her, but he used the end of the flashlight to hook the hem of her knee-length skirt. He flicked it upward, just for a second, just enough to see her legs, her knees, and the belt of her pants underneath. And there, clipped to that belt, right at her hip, was a lanyard. It was tucked up, hidden by her hoodie. But the bold, blue and white card at the end of it was clearly visible in the flashlight's beam. It was a city government security badge. The photo was of her. The name, in clear block letters, read Elena Vance. And right below it, in smaller but unmistakable type, was her title, Special Assistant, Office of the Mayor. The world seemed to stop. The buzzing of the streetlight grew loud. Kellerman's breath caught in his throat. His eyes, wide with shock, flew from the badge to her face. Elena Vance slowly, deliberately, reached down and smoothed her skirt back into place. She never looked away from him. The cold fury in her eyes had been replaced by something else, something worse. It was a look of pure, undisguised contempt. "Officer Kellerman," she said, his name sounding like a verdict in her mouth. "You will return to your precinct. You will file your report. And you will wait for my call tomorrow." She turned, got into her car, and closed the door. The engine started, a quiet purr in the silent night. She pulled away smoothly, leaving Kellerman standing frozen in the middle of the street, the ghost of that security badge burning in his vision, the first true fear of his career beginning to crawl up his spine. Officer Ruiz just stared at the empty space where the car had been. The silence after the Toyota's taillights vanished felt like a physical thing, thick and heavy. Officer Dan Kellerman stood rooted to the pavement, the orange streetlight making the sweat on his forehead gleam. The image of that badge was burned onto the back of his eyes. The city seal, her photo, the title. It played on a loop, each time ending with the cold final sound of her voice. Officer Luis Ruiz finally moved, a slow shuffle of his boots on the asphalt. He walked around the front of their cruiser, his young face pale under the spinning blue and red lights. He couldn't look at his partner. He stared at the cones lining the road, his mind racing. He'd seen it. He'd seen Kellerman flick up the skirt with the flashlight. He'd seen the badge. He'd heard the words Mayor's Office. A sick feeling, part dread and part shame, settled in his stomach. Kellerman sucked in a sharp breath as if coming up for air. He turned, his movements stiff. "Right," he said, the word coming out too loud for the quiet street. "We're done here." "Pack it up, sir." Ruiz's voice was thin. "The checkpoint. We have 2 more hours on the shift." "I said we're done." Kellerman barked, the force of it making Ruiz flinch. "It's dead. Nothing's happening. We're shutting it down." He started grabbing the traffic cones, throwing them into the back of the cruiser with more violence than necessary. The clatter of plastic on metal was jarring. Ruiz hurried to help, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't ask about the report. He didn't ask about what happened. The unspoken thing hung between them, huge and poisonous. As they worked, a sleek sedan drove by. The driver, a man in a suit, glanced at them with mild curiosity. Kellerman felt that looked like a slap. "Asterisk, did you see?" He thought, panic rising. Asterisk, did anyone see? Asterisk 5 minutes later. They were in the car, the checkpoint gone as if it never was. Kellerman gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. The dashboard radio, usually a stream of codes and dispatches, was silent. "We need to get the story straight," Kellerman said suddenly, not looking at Ruiz. Ruiz's heart thumped. "Sir, for the report." She was argumentative. She matched a description we got earlier for a suspect in a shoplifting call over on Elm. Fit the profile. That's why we escalated the stop. But we didn't get any call about shoplifting on Elm, Ruiz said quietly, staring out his window at the dark. Expensive houses blurring past. "We will have by the time the log is checked," Kellerman said, his voice low and insistent. "Mistakes happen. Dispatch gets things crossed. The point is, we had a reason. We had probable cause. She resisted the pat-down. She was hostile. We did the search for officer safety. Found nothing. End of story." Ruiz said nothing. The lie was clumsy, a blanket thrown over a raging fire. He thought of the woman's face. Not hostile, not argumentative. She had been calm, right up until the end. She had asked for grounds. She had a right to do that. He'd learned that in the academy. Chapter 3. That's not what happened. Ruiz mumbled, almost to himself. Kellerman slammed his palm against the steering wheel. The car swerved slightly. "Listen to me, kid. You think this is about what happened? It's about survival. You want your career to be over before it starts? You want to be known as the rookie who helped harass the mayor's daughter? You think she's going to tell a nice version? No, she's going to bury us. We give them a reason, a police reason, or we are finished. You understand? Finished." The word hung in the air. Ruiz thought of his mom. How proud she was when he got the badge. He thought of his rent, his student loans. The cruiser pulled into the rear lot of the precinct, a concrete box under harsh white security lights. The normalcy of the place, the smell of stale coffee and floor cleaner, the distant sound of a typing felt alien and wrong. Inside, the night shift was quiet. A few officers typed at computers. The sergeant, a tired-looking man with a gray mustache, looked up from his paperwork as they approached the duty desk. "Kellerman, Ruiz, you're back early. Everything quiet in the land of the rich and leafy?" Kellerman leaned on the desk, trying for his usual casual slouch. It came off as tense. "Dead slow, Sarge. Not a thing. Decided to call it. Save the city some overtime." He forced a grin that didn't reach his eyes. The sergeant's gaze shifted from Kellerman to Ruiz, who was staring at a spot on the floor. "You okay, son? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ruiz's head snapped up. "I'm fine, Sergeant. Just tired." "Oh." The sergeant's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'll need your checkpoint logs and the stop report by end of shift. Brief summary." "On it, Sarge," Kellerman said, already moving toward the report room. "Come on, Ruiz." In the small, windowless room with its old computers and buzzing fluorescent lights, Kellerman sat heavily. He clicked open a new report form. He started typing, his fingers hitting the keys with hard, definitive taps. Asterisk vehicle out of place in high-income area. Driver exhibited nervous, evasive behavior. Suspected possible connection to earlier incident. Asterisk Rose watched the words appear on the screen. Each one felt like a stone added to a weight on his chest. He saw the woman's hands resting calmly on the wheel. He saw her direct gaze. Where was the nervous, evasive behavior? It was in Kellerman's head, not on the street. "You're my witness," Kellerman said without looking up. "You corroborate. You back my play. We walk out of this together." Ruiz didn't answer. He was thinking of the badge. The way it had been tucked away, hidden. She hadn't played a card. She hadn't said, "Do you know who my father is?" She had taken the humiliation, absorbed it, and only revealed herself at the very last, most damning second. She had wanted to see what he would do, and Kellerman had shown her. He had shown them both. Kellerman finished typing and printed 2 copies. He shoved one across the table to Ruiz. "Sign it." Ruiz looked down at the paper. The official narrative. A story about a suspicious woman in a suspicious car. It was clean, professional, and from start to finish, a complete fabrication. His signature would make it real. It would make him complicit. He picked up a pen. His hand felt numb. He thought about his future, the thin blue line, the brotherhood Kellerman was always talking about. He thought about the woman's face in that final moment, the quiet, terrifying power in her voice when she told them to wait for her call. He put the pen down. "I can't," he whispered. "What did you say?" Kellerman's voice was dangerously low. "I can't sign that, sir." "It's not true. We had no call about shoplifting." She wasn't evasive. You lifted her skirt with your flashlight. There was no reason for that." Kellerman stood up so fast, his chair screeched back. He loomed over the younger man, his face flushed with anger and fear. "You think truth matters now? You think this is about right and wrong? This is about us and them. And she is them. She will eat you alive, you stupid kid." The door to the report room opened. The sergeant stood there, holding a steaming mug of coffee. He took in the scene. Kellerman red-faced and leaning over the table, Ruiz white as a sheet, the unsigned report between them. "Everything all right in here, gentlemen?" the sergeant asked, his tone flat. Kellerman straightened up, smoothing his uniform. "Fine, Sarge. Just reviewing the report." Ruiz here is a little conflicted on the wording. New kid jitters. The sergeant didn't move. His eyes, old and weary, went from Kellerman's forced calm to Ruiz's obvious distress to the printed report on the table. "Conflicted," he repeated slowly, "on the wording of a routine stop report from a dead quiet checkpoint." He took a slow sip of his coffee. "Why don't you both take a seat? Start from the beginning. And this time," he said, "look." The air in the small report room felt like it had been sucked out. The sergeant stood in the doorway, a solid, unmoving block in the fluorescent light. He didn't come all the way in. He just stood there, holding his coffee, waiting. His silence was worse than shouting. Officer Kellerman slowly sank back into his chair, the fight draining out of him. All that was left was a hollow, cold feeling in his gut. He stared at the false report on the screen, the words now looking stupid and weak. Officer Ruiz couldn't bring himself to sit. He stood by the wall, arms crossed tight over his chest, like he was holding himself together. "Sergeant, it's—" Kellerman started, his voice rough. "I didn't ask you yet." The sergeant cut him off quietly. He looked at Ruiz. "Son, what happened out there?" Ruiz's throat was dry. He glanced at Kellerman, who was now staring at a coffee stain on the table, his face closed off. The Brotherhood speech felt like it happened years ago. Ruiz knew if he lied now, it would stick to him forever. It would become part of him. He took a shaky breath. "We stopped a car. An older Toyota. The driver was a young woman. She was polite. She provided her license and registration immediately. Everything checked out clear. The words started to come easier, tumbling out. He described it all, just as he saw it. The calm questions. The demand for her to step out. The made-up claim about a bulge. The pat-down that found nothing. Then, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, he described the flashlight. The flick of the skirt hem. The badge. He didn't embellish. He didn't try to make Kellerman sound like a monster or the woman like a saint. He just told the facts, plain and simple. It made the story sound even worse. When Ruiz finished, the only sound was the hum of the computer and the distant ring of a phone at the front desk. The sergeant hadn't moved. His face, with its deep lines, showed nothing. "Kellerman," the sergeant said finally. "That accurate?" Kellerman didn't look up. He gave one short, tight nod. The sergeant let out a long, slow breath, like he'd been holding it. He walked fully into the room and closed the door with a soft click. The sound was very final. "You saw the badge," the sergeant said. "You're sure?" "Special assistant to the mayor." "Yeah," Kellerman muttered. "Unsure." And she said to wait for her call. Another nod. The sergeant put his coffee mug down on the table with a firm tap. "Okay, here's what's not going to happen. You are not going to file this work of fiction." He gestured at the computer screen with disgust. "You are both going to write separate, factual accounts of the incident. Right now. Every detail you remember. You will not talk to each other while you do it. Ruiz, you use that computer. Kellerman, you get a pen and paper." He was all business now, the tiredness gone, replaced by a grim focus. This was damage control, and the first rule was to secure the truth before it could get any more twisted. "Then," the sergeant continued, "you, Kellerman, are going home. You are on administrative leave, effective immediately. Turn in your gun and your badge before you leave this room." Kellerman's head jerked up. "Sarge, you can't just—" "I can, and I am," the sergeant said, his voice like iron. "This isn't a debate. This is me trying to stop a grenade from blowing up this whole precinct. Go home. Wait. Do not talk to the press. Do not post anything online. Do not even think about it. You breathe, you eat, you watch TV, you wait." He turned to Ruiz. "You'll finish your shift on desk duty. Then you'll go home too. Same rules. You talk to nobody." Ruiz just nodded, feeling numb. He sat at the computer and opened a new document. As he started to type the words, "incident report," the reality of it all crashed down. This was official now. There would be an investigation. His name would be on it. Across the room, Kellerman sat with a notepad, a cheap ballpoint pen in his big hand. He stared at the blank page. He tried to write, "I observed the vehicle," but his hand wouldn't move. He was stuck, replaying that 1 second, the flash of the badge, the look on her face. He knew deep down the sergeant was right. Suspension was just the beginning. He was finished. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk across the city, in a quiet, tree-lined street in Crestview. Elena Vance parked her old Toyota in the driveway of a modest, well-kept bungalow. The house was dark, except for the porch light, left on for her. She turned off the engine, but didn't get out. The calm she had worn like armor in front of the officers was gone. Now, alone in the dark, she began to shake. It was a fine, tremoring vibration that started in her hands and moved up her arms. She gripped the steering wheel to try and make it stop, but it was no use. The heat of humiliation washed over her, fresh and sharp. The feel of the flashlight, cold and impersonal, tapping the fabric of her skirt. The eyes of the people in the car that drove by. The towering, angry presence of the older cop looming over her. She had never felt so small, so exposed, so powerless in her life. Tears of pure frustration burned her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry over him. She took several deep, gulping breaths, the way her mom had taught her when she was little and had a nightmare. After a few minutes, the shaking subsided to a dull ache in her bones. The cold, clear thinking started to return. This wasn't just something that happened to her. It was a thing that happened. A documented event. And she had a card to play. A card she hated having to use. She got out of the car, her legs a little unsteady, and walked into the silent house. She went straight to the small bathroom, flicked on the light, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face looked the same, but she felt different. Something had been peeled away. She unclipped the city badge from her belt and held it in her hand. It was just plastic and a lanyard. But tonight, it had been a shield and a weapon. She hated that it mattered more than her own words, her own rights. She tossed it onto her dresser, where it landed with a dull clack. She knew what came next. The call. She sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling to her father's number in her phone. He'd be asleep. He had an early breakfast meeting with the police chief about community relations, ironically enough. She almost wanted to laugh, but it would have been a bitter, broken sound. She pressed call. It rang 3 times before he answered, his voice thick with sleep, but instantly alert. "Sweetheart? Everything okay? You're home late." Hearing his voice, the familiar, safe sound of it, almost broke her composure again. She squeezed her eyes shut. "Dad," she said, and her voice was steady, much steadier than she felt. "No, everything is not okay. I need to tell you what just happened to me." And she did. She told him everything, from the moment the flashlight waved her over to the moment she drove away. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just laid out the facts, just as Ruiz would be doing back at the precinct. The request for grounds, the pat down, the flick of the skirt, the badge. On the other end of the line, there was a silence so profound she could almost feel the temperature drop through the phone. When her father finally spoke, his voice was different. It was the voice he used in press conferences when a city contractor messed up, low and controlled and very, very dangerous. "The officer's name," he said. It wasn't a question. Kellerman. His partner was Ruiz. He seemed uncomfortable with it, but he didn't stop it. Another pause. She could picture him sitting up in bed, running a hand over his face, his mind already shifting from father to mayor. "Are you hurt?" he asked, the father breaking through for a second. "No," she said, then corrected herself. "Not physically." "Okay," a long exhale. "Okay, listen to me. You did exactly the right thing. You stayed calm. You protected yourself. You got home safe. That is the only thing that matters tonight. Now, I need you to try and get some sleep." Sleep? The idea was impossible. "Try," he said, his voice softening. "Tomorrow, this becomes my problem. And the police chief's problem. You will not be alone in this room when we handle it. You understand?" She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Yeah, I understand. I love you, kid. Love you too, Dad." She hung up and lay back on her bed, still in her clothes, staring at the ceiling. In the precinct, 2 reports were being written. In a quiet suburb, a mayor was now wide awake, staring into the dark, planning his next move. And in her little house, Elena Vance relived, over and over, the feeling of the night air on. The mayor's morning started in the dark, hours before the sun came up. He didn't sleep after the call with his daughter. He just sat in his home office, a small, book-lined room, with only the glow of a single lamp. The anger was there, a hot, hard knot in his chest. But he couldn't just be a furious father. He had to be the mayor. And that meant thinking 3 steps ahead. His first call, at 5:30 a.m., was to Police Chief Robert Miller. He didn't use his personal cell. He used the secure line to the chief's. Direct office, knowing it would bypass everything and ring on the man's nightstand. "Miller," a groggy voice answered. "It's Vance. We need to meet. Now. My office." "And bring the incident report from a traffic stop last night involving Officer Dan Kellerman." There was a beat of silence on the line. The chief was awake now. "Mayor, what's this about?" "It's about one of your officers using his flashlight to lift my daughter's skirt on a public street during an illegal search." It's about that officer being on duty right now, unless you've already done something about it. I'll see you in 45 minutes. He hung up before the chief could reply. He needed the man off balance. He needed him scared. By 6:15 a.m., the mayor was behind his desk in City Hall. The office was cold and quiet. His daughter, Elena, sat in a chair by the window. She wore a simple, professional dress, her back straight. She looked tired, but calm. She had asked to be here, and he hadn't argued. She was the one who had lived it. Chief Miller arrived 5 minutes later, still buttoning his uniform shirt. He was a big, broad man with a politician's handshake and a cop's eyes. He carried a thin file folder. His face was carefully neutral, but his eyes flicked to Elena and then away, quickly. "Mayor." "Elena," he said, nodding. "Close the door, Chief," the mayor said. His voice was quiet, which made it worse. "Sit," the chief did. He placed the folder on the desk. "I've placed Officer Kellerman on immediate administrative leave. His weapon and badge are secured. I have the initial reports from both officers involved." "Read them to me," the mayor said, leaning back in his chair. He didn't touch the folder. The chief opened it. He cleared his throat. He read Officer Ruiz's statement first. It was clear, factual, and damning. When he got to the part about the flashlight, the mayor saw Elena's hands tighten in her lap, but her expression didn't change. Then the chief read Kellerman's handwritten statement. It was shorter. It talked about a vehicle out of place and a driver exhibiting a defensive posture. It claimed the flashlight was used to check for ankle holsters and that the skirt was inadvertently displaced. The mayor let the chief finish the weak, ugly lie. The room was silent for a long moment. "So," the mayor said finally, "one officer tells the truth. The other writes a fairy tale. And this fairy tale was almost the official record until your sergeant had the sense to separate them. Is that right?" The chief shifted in his chair. "It appears that way, sir. The internal investigation begins today." "No," the mayor said, leaning forward, planting his hands on the desk. "It began last night when my daughter called me. Here is what is going to happen. Today, Officer Kellerman is not on administrative leave. He is suspended, without pay, pending termination proceedings. You will announce that publicly." "Sir, the union, the process." "I don't care about the process right now." The mayor's voice rose, just for a second, before he clamped down on it again. "A young woman was publicly humiliated and illegally searched by one of your officers. That officer then tried to falsify a report. The process failed her last night on that street. We are now in damage control mode for this city and for whatever shred of trust people still have in your department. A paid vacation is not the message we send." The chief looked down at the folder, his jaw working. He knew the mayor was right from a public perspective, but every cop instinct screamed about procedure. "And Officer Ruiz?" The mayor glanced at Elena. She spoke for the first time, her voice clear in the quiet room. He didn't stop it, but he didn't lie. He seemed trapped. The mayor nodded. "Officer Ruiz remains on active duty. Desk assignment for now. His cooperation will be noted. But we are reviewing the entire checkpoint protocol, effective immediately. All traffic stops for the next week will have body cam review. You will draft the new policy with my office." He was firing orders like bullets, boxing the chief in, making it clear who was in charge of this disaster. The chief knew he had no ground to stand on. "Understood, Mr. Mayor." "Good," the mayor said. "We're holding a press conference at 10 a.m. You will be standing beside me. You will announce the suspension without pay and the review. You will express the department's profound regret. You will not take questions." The chief looked like he'd swallowed something sour, but he nodded. Just then, the mayor's assistant buzzed in, her voice tense. "Sir, I have Maya Chun from the Metro Daily on line 1. She says it's urgent regarding an incident last night involving your daughter. The mayor and the chief exchanged a look. The story was out. Someone from that street had talked, or maybe a cop at the precinct had leaked it. It didn't matter how. The clock had just sped up. Tell her I have no comment, but there will be a press conference at 10 a.m., the mayor said. He looked at his daughter. You don't have to be there for this. Yes, Elena said, standing up. I do. Asterisk, 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 by 9:45 a.m., the City Hall press room was packed. Reporters buzzed, smelling blood in the water. The rumor was wild. A traffic stop, the mayor's daughter, some kind of humiliation. Cameras were set up, microphones clustered like metal flowers on the podium. At 10 a.m. sharp, Mayor Richard Vance walked in. He was followed by Police Chief Miller, who looked like he was marching to his own court-martial. And then, to a ripple of surprise, came Alana Vance. She walked calmly, her head high, and took a position slightly behind and to the side of her father. The mayor stepped to the microphones. He didn't have notes. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice carrying easily in the suddenly silent room. Early this morning, I was informed of a serious incident involving a member of our police department and my daughter, Elena. He paused, letting the confirmation of the rumor sink in. Flashbulbs popped toward Elena. She didn't flinch. He outlined the facts, sticking to the cold language of Ruiz's report. The stop, the escalation, the illegal search, the discovery of her identity. He didn't yell. He didn't use dramatic words. The plain facts were dramatic enough. This was not, he said firmly, a case of my daughter invoking privilege. She did not reveal who she was until after the violation occurred. This was a case of a police officer exceeding his authority and violating the rights of a citizen, and then attempting to cover it up. He nodded to the chief, who stepped forward, his face a mask. The chief read a short, stiff statement announcing Officer Kellerman's suspension without pay and the immediate review of patrol procedures. He said the words deeply regret and full investigation, but they sounded hollow in the room. When the chief finished, the mayor stepped back to the mic. The room exploded with shouted questions. Mayor, will there be criminal charges? Chief. Miller, how can the public trust your department? Elena, how do you feel? The mayor held up a hand for silence, but it was Elena who moved. She took a single small step forward, coming even with her father. She didn't go to the podium, but she looked out at the sea of faces and cameras. The room went quiet again, shocked. She didn't speak for a moment. She seemed to be gathering herself. When she did speak, her voice was softer than her father's, but it carried the same quiet force. Last night, she said, that officer didn't see a person. He saw a car that didn't belong. He saw a face that didn't fit. He saw a vibe. She used her fingers to make air quotes, a gesture that was both youthful and bitterly sarcastic. The only thing that changed what happened was when he saw the badge. That's what stopped him. Not my words, not my rights. A piece of plastic. She looked away from the cameras, directly at the police chief, then back to the reporters. So my question, the one I think the city needs to answer, is, what about everyone else? What about the person who doesn't have a badge for him to find? She stopped, her point made. She didn't cry. She didn't look angry. She just looked, resolved. And in that moment, the story stopped being about a single traffic stop. It became about something much, much bigger. The press room erupted again, but the mayor gently guided his daughter away from the podium, through a side door, leaving Chief Miller alone to face the shouting crowd. As the door closed behind them, the mayor put an arm around his daughter's shoulders. She leaned into him, just for a second, the strength she'd shown on stage finally wavering. Back in the roar of the press room, Chief Miller stared at the spot where Elena had stood. He knew, with a sinking certainty, that she had just won the whole. The days after the press conference were a kind of slow-motion explosion. It wasn't loud, but it spread everywhere, seeping into every corner of the city. In his small, tidy apartment, Officer Dan Kellerman sat in the dark. The TV was off. The blinds were drawn. His suspension without pay was a financial gut punch, but it was the silence that was worse. The phone didn't ring. No texts from buddies on the force checking in. Nothing from the union rep yet. It was like he had already ceased to exist. He'd gone from being a man with a badge, a voice on the radio, a presence on the street, to a ghost in a living room. He replayed that night over and over, trying to find the moment where he could have turned back. He always stopped at the same place, the feeling of being challenged by her calm voice. That was the pebble that started the avalanche. Now he was buried under a dot at the precinct. Officer Luis Ruiz worked the front desk, answering phones and filing paperwork. It was mind-numbing work, but he was grateful for it. It was a place to hide. The other officers didn't shun him, not exactly. But there was a distance. Some saw him as a snitch for telling the truth. Others, a quieter few, would give him a brief, almost invisible nod in the hallway. He'd gotten his own letter about testifying before the Internal Review Board. The thought of sitting in a room, speaking against another officer, made him feel sick. But the thought of lying made him feel worse. He was stuck in the middle, and the only way out was through. The story, fueled by Elena's quiet words at the podium, became a national talking point. News channels ran segments with titles like The Badge or The Citizen. And beyond the traffic stop, the video of the press conference was played endlessly, with pundits dissecting Elena's question. Asterisk, what about everyone else? Asterisk Maya Chun, the reporter who had first called City Hall, published a deep investigation. It wasn't just about that one night. She laid out years of data on traffic stops in the city, showing stark patterns of who was pulled over and where. The Westwood checkpoint, it turned out, had a statistically tiny yield of actual DUI arrests, but a very high rate of citations for minor infractions in the neighborhoods people were leaving, not the wealthy one they were in. Her article asked a simple, devastating question. Was the checkpoint about safety or about control? The public reaction was a wave. For many, especially in neighborhoods that had long felt over-policed, Elena's story was a confirmation. Community meetings filled up. People stood and shared their own stories, less dramatic, but the same flavor of being made to feel small, of orders barked, of searches that felt less about safety and more about power. For others, it was a political football. Talk radio hosts blasted the mayor for throwing a good cop under the bus and accused Elena of playing a race card. The mayor watched it all from the eye of the storm. His priority was shielding his daughter, but she didn't want to be shielded. She went back to her classes at the university. She faced the whispers, the stares, the occasional supportive smile from a stranger. She absorbed it. She had started something, and she felt a responsibility to see it through, even if all she could do was live her life. 2 weeks after the stop, the Internal Review Board convened. It was held in a bland, city-issue conference room. Around the table sat a mix of senior police officials, a civilian appointee from the city council, and a lawyer from the mayor's office. Officer Ruiz was called first. He wore his best uniform, the one he'd gotten for his graduation. It felt tight. He swore to tell the truth, his voice barely a whisper at first. They walked him through his written report. He stuck to the facts, just as he had that night in the precinct. When they asked about Kellerman's state of mind, he said, he seemed irritated, bored, then irritated. When they asked why he didn't intervene, he looked down at his hands. He was my training officer. I didn't know how to stop it without making it worse. The civilian on the board, an older woman with kind eyes, gave him a small, understanding nod. It didn't make him feel better. Kellerman was called next. He looked older, diminished in a cheap suit, instead of his uniform. His union lawyer did most of the talking, stressing Kellerman's long service, the pressures of the job, his misinterpretation of the situation. When Kellerman finally spoke, the defiance was gone. His voice was flat. I made a mistake. A big one. I got angry. I was wrong. He didn't try to justify the flashlight. He just admitted it. It was the only move he had left. The board members listened, their faces unreadable. Helena was the final witness. She arrived alone, refusing her father's offer to have a city lawyer beside her. She wasn't there as the mayor's daughter. She was there as the person it happened to. Her testimony was the shortest. She simply confirmed the facts of Ruiz's report from her perspective. When they asked her about the emotional impact, she paused. It made me feel like I wasn't a person, she said quietly. Like I was a problem that needed to be solved. And that feeling doesn't really go away. You just learn to carry it. There were no more questions. A week later, the decisions came down dot for Officer Dan Kellerman. The outcome was terminal. He was not just fired. He was officially dismissed for conduct unbecoming an officer and falsifying a report. The criminal charges the DA considered official misconduct and unlawful search were dropped in exchange for his agreement never to seek employment in law enforcement or security in the state again. It was a clean, quiet end to his career. The news covered it for a day, then moved on. For Kellerman, sitting in his silent apartment with the official letter, it was the rest of his life. He was a man defined by a single terrible minute. For the department, the changes were public and structural. The police chief, under immense pressure from the mayor and the city council, announced a sweeping new protocol. Checkpoints would now require pre-approval with a clear safety goal. The consent search was all but eliminated. Most importantly, and largely due to Maya Chun's reporting, the city invested in a real, transparent public database of all traffic stops, broken down by race, neighborhood, and outcome. It was named the Transparency Initiative, but everyone in the halls of the precinct knew its unofficial name, the Vance Rule. For Officer Luz Ruiz, the path was harder and less clear. He was not disciplined. His truthful testimony was officially noted in his file. He was moved from the desk and back to patrol, but with a new, by-the-book partner. The weight of what he'd done, both his failure to act and his decision to tell the truth, hung on him. One afternoon, his new partner, an older woman with a reputation for fairness, looked at him during a quiet moment in the cruiser. "You know, Ruiz," she said, not unkindly, "you can either let this eat you up, or you can learn from it. Be the cop now that you wish you were that night. It's the only way it means anything." He nodded, staring out the window. He wasn't sure he could, but he knew he had to try. The mayor watched the reforms roll out, a political victory. But at home, he watched his daughter. She was quieter. She stared out windows sometimes. The victory didn't erase the experience. One evening, they sat on the back porch of her house. The crickets were starting up. "You changed things," he said to her. "Real things." She nodded, sipping her water. "I know? Are you okay?" She thought about it for a long time. "I will be," she said finally. "But I keep thinking about what I said. What about everyone else? I had a badge in my pocket, Dad. I had the mayor on speed dial. And it still happened. So what about the people who don't have that? The ones where the story ends with the flashlight, and there's no badge to find?" She shook her head. "The rule change is good. The data is good. But that feeling, that's what needs to change. And I don't know how you make a rule for that." He had no answer for her. He just put his arm around her shoulders, and they sat in the gathering dark, listening to the sounds of the city, a city that was a little different because of what she'd endured, but a city where, tomorrow, someone else would be pulled over, and a new story would begin. The work, they both knew,